So Tangled the series is a thing, and
Why is no one talking about this show?
first of all, yes, that Tangled, the Disney princess movie with Repunzel. They made a TV series out of it as a sequel, and it is possibly the greatest thing that I have seen in a long time. Everyone was all, have you seen Mandy Moore's new TV show? Talking about This Is Us.
But Tangled was where the real magic was happening.
To be fair, I've not actually seen This Is Us, so I don't know how good or bad it is, but people say they cry a lot, but this show was already making me cry. I mean it. It had heartbreak, loss, love, adventure, and betrayal. So much betrayal. I haven't been this excited about a show since the first time I watched Steins Gate, Full Metal Alchemist, or Avatar: The Last Airbender. The Tangled TV show is that good. I've mentioned it and shown it a few times in previous episodes of This Is a Thing, but I didn't want to talk about it until I had finished watching the whole thing. Well, that happened last night, and instead of writing whatever other episode of This Is a Thing I was supposed to be writing, I'm writing this one because I need to talk about this show. This is one of those shows that comes up once in a blue moon, like those other shows that I mentioned. Every few years, when the stars align perfectly, a gem of a show is created. You know the kind of show I'm talking about. The kind that every episode makes your heart race and every roll of the credits leaves you wanting more. The kind of show that has climaxes that leave you sweating or conflict escalations that have you screaming, what the fuck just happened? But in a good way, like, Okay, calm down, Janglez. You can't just say why the show makes you feel that way with no context. So, why is this show so spectacular?
Everything!
Sort of. This is again one of those shows where all the parts make up the whole, and each part is spectacular, from the choice to shift to the small screen, the new cartoon aesthetic, the music and score, the narrative and story structure, and particularly the characterization and portrayal of characters. And those are just a few of the things because there's so much to love about this show. In case you haven't noticed, I'm a wee bit obsessed currently, and so today I want to rave about Tangled the series. So it's pretty obvious that the show is a sequel to the CGI Disney masterpiece that is Tangled. The show was created and developed by Chris Sonnenberg and Shane Prigmore with Disney Television Animation, and actually began production and development in 2015, a whole 2 years before its release. It's no surprise that the show was greenlit after the short movie Tangled Ever After was created, due to fans demanding more Tangled media. It seemed even after that short there was an audience that wanted more from the world of Tangled. From the start, the show began with a bang, kicking off with a 55-minute Disney Channel original movie that would serve as the show's pilot and teases the return of Rapunzel's blonde hair, which would spark the adventure. The show was clearly highly anticipated because in 2017 it was renewed for a second season before the movie pilot had even premiered. The show was also rebranded as Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure for some reason. So if you're looking to watch it, it's sometimes called that. It seems kind of strange to go through all the trouble of naming the movie Tangled so that it comes across as more gender neutral and will appeal to both boys and girls, but then have the show be rebranded halfway through its run back to Repunzel anyway. Well, the third and final season was released in 2019 and wrapped up in March of this year, 2020, with a spectacular 3-part finale. There was also a series of animated shorts used to promote the series. The show was critically acclaimed for children's animation and was nominated and won several awards for various episodes throughout its 3-season run. Although the awards were for children's animation, this show, like many others, has a very wide appeal. Although it is largely about the hijinks the characters get themselves into, there is a surprisingly deep amount of storytelling and fascinating world building that will definitely appeal to older audiences. Unlike some other animated shows that are marketed for younger children when they probably should not have been, Spectacular Spider-Man, Legend of Korra, this show is for children, but it's not just for children, because there's an overarching story that is an absolute thrill ride. The reason for this kind of spectrum of engagement has to do with the change of medium from movie to television. Moving from the big screen to the small screen, or vice versa, can be difficult for any franchise or story. There are pros and cons to either format, but knowing what those restrictions and freedoms provide and how to adapt to them is actually more important than what those limitations and advantages are. In the case of Tangled, the fact that the story was conceived of as a television series already meant that its showrunners and writers understood that they could tell a longer, more in-depth story driven by character interactions and wacky harebrained schemes in an episodic format. Larger overarching narrative story beats and exposition can be revealed bit by bit in every episode, allowing for contained and entertaining individual episodes that lead up to show-stopping and sometimes world-altering episodes that deal directly with the overarching story. If you watch our podcast, you might be familiar with what is slowly becoming my catchphrase: this should have been a TV show. Well, it's shows like this Tangled sequel that have me saying this. I feel so vindicated talking about this show because it really does prove that TV shows have the ability to tell these larger world and character-driven stories, whereas I feel as though movies excel in telling a self-contained story. The only time movie sequels really work is when the whole thing is conceived of, or better yet, filmed at the same time. If you want to make a sequel for a movie that has that many ideas, you're probably better off with a TV series anyway. I'm not saying that this will fix everything wrong with a movie, not at all. I'm just saying that if you're already trying to make something episodic with a movie sequel, why not go right for a longer format where you can have the time to tell a story in that manner, and the audiences will also have more time to digest that information. Look at Frozen 2, for example, with some spoilers. That movie had its problems in production due to lack of timing, planning, or indeed
Any general direction?
But at the risk of bleeding into our podcast, I'll make a quick pitch. Imagine breaking that movie down into episodes. Everyone is happy except for Elsa, who sings Into the Unknown and ends up awakening the spirits. That's a 2-part premiere right there. Then, finding each of the spirits can be an episode or maybe 2 as they go on their adventure. This also means that splitting up the characters gives them more time to have their own side stories, and then there can be a greater mystery over the arc of the season as to what is Otto Holland or who or what the 5th spirit is. There. I fixed Frozen 2 by making it a show. And that doesn't include all the extra time you have to flesh out side plots.
Someone call Disney and tell them to pay me.
In a movie, you have roughly 2 hours, but in a 12-episode season of 22-minute episodes, you have almost 4.5 hours. If we're talking strictly about time, I don't see why the choice isn't clear. Now, obviously, television budget is smaller, and the idea of television conceptually is smaller and carries less prestige, but we are seeing a change in that. I'll come back to this idea in another episode of This Is a Thing. Actually, the episode I was supposed to be writing today, in fact. Either way, making Tangled into a series was the best decision for the story.
Vindication!
With the shift to the small screen, there were the obvious aforementioned budget limitations, but Tangled handles this with grace. The show shifted art styles. CGI is expensive, and although computer animation has come a long way, it's still costly as balls. If the reports of the Tangled movie are true regarding their production budget, an estimated $260 million was spent on that movie, and that would make it one of the most expensive movies of all time. I'm not surprised they would decide to change their art style. But rather than a limitation, I think the art style is excellent. The sharp colored line art is reminiscent of My Little Pony, but the colorization is evocative of the painting style that Repunzel uses throughout the original movie. The movie's art style was inspired by a painting called The Swing, so it's like the whole thing has come full circle. Even within the show, we often see Repunzel painting in her journal, and the art style is like a simplification of what the characters look like in the show. Besides, a more cartoony style is not a bad thing. It allows more expressive, stretchy, and squishy animation, and it's less jarring than the use of abnormal physics would be in a more realistic CGI animation style, in my opinion. The colors are more vibrant than the original movie or short, and I think it makes the show look more charming, more colorful, more dynamic, and more playful. A lot of the visual gags in the show become more apparent, and if you're observant enough, you can even see nods in the show to sequences from the original movie. On top of that, just look at how cute Pascal looks now, or even baby Pascal and little Repunzel.
Don't be afraid, Mr. Frog. You're safe now. Here, it's yours. It's a gift.
So cute! So structural and visual components were changed significantly in the transition to the small screen, but those were the only drastic changes, since one of the most important parts of Tangled's identity, the music, was not changed. You can't have a Tangled show without some musical numbers, of course. The clean strumming of acoustic guitars with a hint of distorted electric guitar, supported by a full orchestra and occasionally a backbeat on a drum set, are the same musical aesthetics that were used in the movie. And why wouldn't they be? All the songs and orchestration in the show are done by Alan Menkin. You know, the man behind Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. Yeah, they got him. And then they paired him up with Glenn Slater as a lyricist and songwriter, which brings back the original duo behind all the songs from the original Tangled movie. And holy fuck does this pay off. The songs range from catchy and upbeat to full-on theatrical power ballads. Menkin and Slater won an Emmy Award for their work on this show, and I think the songs might be better than the original movie's pieces. The song Wind in My Hair was composed for the movie pilot, and it serves as the opening theme song for the show. It has that same upbeat feeling as When Will My Life Begin, but it's a little bit more theatrical. I never get sick of hearing that song, and it was often stuck in my head. If you can believe it, it's not even close to the best song though. Not by a long shot. The song that won Menkin and Slater their Emmy is called Waiting in the Wings, and it is so powerful. With this song, Menkin is one of only 16 people to have an EGOT, or to have won an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony Award, and he deserves it. This song is otherworldly. Eat your heart out, Let It Go. Everyone knows that Into the Unknown was a better song anyway, but Waiting in the Wings beats both of them out. Glenn Slater's lyrics are as powerful and as poignant as ever, and they're paired great with Menkin's scoring. But Slater's lyrics do have a lot of source material to draw on, which brings us to the story and narrative. Obviously, the structure of the show's narrative is episodic, as I have mentioned, but the plot itself is where the show really shines. Except maybe the music. Menkin won an Emmy, guys! To be honest, I have been putting off writing this part because I really think you ought to go into the show blind. Don't look up anything on the internet, don't even look up the songs, because you will spoil things for yourself that ought not to be spoiled. Experiencing them firsthand is so much better. Take it from me, I watched the show without spoilers, and if you can't tell by my exuberance and enthusiasm by now, I don't know what to tell you. That being said, in order to talk more about why the show excels at its storytelling and characterization, I'm going to have to spoil a little bit of the show. But I promise, it's only the events of the movie pilot and the first 2 episodes. Repunzel is reveling in the excitement and festivities leading up to her coronation, while getting to know her parents, the king and queen, and spending time with Eugene, formerly known as Flynn Rider, and her handmaid and new friend, the dry-humored and snarky Cassandra. Cassandra shows Repunzel a way out of the castle and a strange-looking geological formation that she found. Upon touching these black rocks, Repunzel's blonde hair suddenly returns. She tries to hide the hair from her friends and family during the coronation with Cassandra's help. Eventually, everyone finds out about her hair, and then more of these mysterious black rocks begin to appear throughout the kingdom. Cassandra, Repunzel, and Eugene, aka Flynn, are introduced to a young alchemist named Varian, who is researching how the rocks operate. And finally, they are joined by Flynn's old friend, Lance Strongbow, and all the adventuring and mystery solving goes on from there. The pilot and first few episodes are pretty innocuous. They reveal nothing about how grand the story is, and to be honest, I thought the show was just going to be about Repunzel doing princessy things with her friends. I was wrong. So wrong! The show does not have any filler, because the episodes that I thought were filler wound up having lasting importance by introducing concepts or magic. There is backstory for characters you didn't think needed it until you got it, and then it was exactly what you wanted. There is world building in the form of myths and legends that have long-lasting importance long after they're introduced. There is magic, science, love, friendship, hatred, and anger, and all of it matters. Even the episodes that don't have these things are important because they usually focus on establishing characters and their relationships. This is where the show excels, because the characterization and interactions of those characters is how the story comes together conceptually. For starters, all the original voice actors return to play their characters. Zachary Levi as Eugene, Frank Welker and D. Bradley Baker share the duty of Pascal and Maximus, and of course Mandy Moore as Repunzel herself. They even got Donna Murphy to come back and play Mother Gothel for the few necessary flashbacks that she's in. But the 3 new characters were also welcome additions. Cassandra is played by Eden Espinosa, who is the understudy for Idina Menzel in Wicked. Yes, that Idina Menzel. So you know that this woman has a supernatural set of pipes, and she is the one who sings Waiting in the Wings. But Varian is not to be outdone. He's played by Jeremy Jordan, who is also a powerhouse. Lastly is Lance, who is played by James Monroe Inglehart, who is most famous for playing the genie in the original stage production of Aladdin on Broadway, so you know he can bring the noise too. But enough about the music. An Emmy! I mean, he should win like 10, one for each song. The real genius behind these 5 characters is how they are all played compared to one another, and more often contrasted with one another, but are still able to remain friends. Lance and Eugene are the most similar, but whereas Eugene is brave, suave, and charming, dude rolled like a natural 20 on his charisma stat.
This is the story of how I died and went to heaven.
Lance is comedic in his cowardice, but always manages to be there in a pinch. Varian is the odd one out. He is the youngest, then his inexperience gets him into trouble, but he is clearly the smartest and most talented of them all. Cassandra is the exact opposite of Repunzel. She is icy, dry, witty, and cutting. She dreams of being a great warrior, but despite her dreams, she deeply cares for the princess, who is more of a friend than her charge. Lastly, in the middle of it all is Repunzel, who is her free-spirited, fun-loving, and kind self, just as she was in the movie. Despite Eugene and Cassandra not getting along all the time, or ever, she is friends with everyone and sees each of her friends, new and old, for exactly who they are. I particularly like how Cassandra is played against Repunzel. The creators went all out making sure that Cassandra is characterized as everything Repunzel is not, and yet the two of them are the closest of friends. Even Cassandra's design with her dark short hair and gray eyes is deliberately opposite Rapunzel's blonde long hair and green eyes. The two of them are competitive with each other, but always friends first. It's a sweet rivalry and something you might see between sisters. Cassandra is such an interesting and attention-catching character, and Varian became a fan favorite, but I personally am a sucker for Eugene's one-liners and devil-may-care quips.
Great story. Could have used a bit more conflict, but the use of props added a nice touch.
But it is Repunzel that I'm most interested in, because she is a total badass. No, really. I know she seems cute and unassuming, because she is, but that is important. There is character growth in Repunzel for sure, but I won't talk about it because that would involve spoilers, and I
Promised I wouldn't!
So, instead, I want to talk about the effects that this character growth has on Repunzel. Or rather, the lack of change that the growth has on Repunzel in terms of her core values and why those values matter not only to Repunzel, but on a broad scale in terms of character portrayal in media. So a lot of batshit out of this world crazy story shit takes place in this show, and the adversity, strife, and darkness that the main characters face causes a few of them to waver. Lance is always the comedic coward, but even Eugene has his moments where he loses his roguish flair and wavers in his belief in himself and what is right, but not Repunzel. Repunzel is always the light. She is always the one who believes in the good of others and the feelings of friendship that bind them all together. There are a few times where various villains try to break Rapunzel's spirit by making her fight, but Repunzel is usually loath to fight. Rapunzel chooses to solve her conflicts in other ways. Without too much detail, in one episode, Rapunzel teams up with a thief to save her friends, and the thief is flabbergasted by Rapunzel's approach to solving problems. It is unconventional, non-confrontational, and just as, if not more effective than other ways. By the end of the episode, this lady thief is actually convinced of the efficacy of Rapunzel's methods, and by the end of the episode, she finds herself swayed by Rapunzel's kindness. We saw this, of course, in the original movie too, when Rapunzel sings "I've Got a Dream," and that managed to get her and Eugene out of the snuggly duckling without a fight.
That was pretty impressive.
I know!
And throughout the show, this is always the case. It is genuine, it is inspiring, and it is female. But Repunzel is female. Wouldn't everything she do then be female? In a perfect world, that would be the case, but unfortunately, that is not so. It's common knowledge that we associate certain characteristics or attributes to one gender or the other. Masculinity is usually associated with aggressive or at least assertive behaviors, and feminine attributes have more to do with nurturing and passivity. This is obvious to anyone familiar with traditional gender roles and associations in Western society. This philosopher named Jacques Lacan came up with the idea called sexuation, which is the difference and disassociation of the male and female sex in a non-biological, more formal logic concept. Lacan argues that male and female sexes as a concept were not just constructs of nature, but were inherently separated by conceptual means. According to Lacan, because we associate these things with the concept of the masculine or the feminine, we also associate certain characteristics as being distinctly part of one gender or the other. Kinda took a left turn into philosophy town back there, but stick with me. Not only are certain characteristics associated with gender, but actions can also be associated with gender. And you can bet your ass that we do this all the time as well. Which brings us back to Repunzel. Repunzel is placed into situations that often involve fighting or conflict, which would be considered male, as the feminine is not considered conflict-oriented. Often in media, this is where the female character takes up her sword and fights back as this badass female character who kicks ass and doesn't take questions because she already has all the answers. In Tangled, Cassandra occupies this role, and there's nothing wrong with that. In a perfect world, anything a person who identifies as female does would be considered female, but this is not the case. Cassandra, by fighting back in this way, occupies more masculine characteristics in the Lacanian sense. She solves her problems by using things we associate with the masculine side of sexuation. Well, what about Eugene? He has some very female attributes. Doesn't that break barriers? Well, sort of. Eugene's main feminine trait is his vanity, which is feminine in its association, but is usually considered a negative.
Really? Oops.
You broke my smolder.
To prove my point further, in literature, Romeo and Juliet both die in the end. Spoilers! But even the way they die can be viewed on different sides of this sexuation. Interestingly, here it is reversed, with Romeo drinking poison as a passive death, therefore feminine, and Juliet stabbing herself, committing a more active end and therefore masculine death. Not to mention swords and daggers are very phallic in nature. Repunzel never dies. Okay, I lied about the spoilers, but it's a Disney show, what did you expect? But she is placed into desperate situations and always comes out showing her feminine attributes and associations as her strength. To be clear, I wish that we did not have these kinds of associations, but we do. And until we don't, I think it is awesome to see that actions and traits that are commonly viewed as weaker or passive or feminine can be just as strong. The actions that Repunzel implements are just as effective, if not more so in some cases, than the more masculine attributes that Cassandra is often seen utilizing. Even when Repunzel is forced to defend herself or others, I think it is interesting that the two objects she uses are her long hair, traditionally associated with females in the West, and a frying pan, an object that is a kitchen utensil, which was, and to some extent still is, known as the domain of women.
Frying pans! Who knew, right?
But these objects are repurposed by Repunzel, and later others, into a masculine-associated task, but not until after the feminine actions of friendship, kindness, nurturing, and care have failed.
Oh, mama, I have got to get me one of these.
Fighting is always Rapunzel's last resort, and even then it is usually only to defend herself or others. She only uses these objects with the intention of defending or knocking out her opponent, never destroying or vanquishing her foes. The creators of Tangled go out of their way to show that Repunzel is a free spirit, and that her unorthodox approach to her whole life is not non-confrontational. Repunzel is not afraid to speak her mind, nor is she deterred when things don't go her way, but she is portrayed as always bright and sunny, even when she's sad, paradoxically. Again, without spoiling too much, it was a pleasure to see a show that had its main character solve even the most world-ending and potentially life-altering and devastating of battles by always offering the hand of friendship and kindness first. When I said the show was like Avatar: The Last Airbender, I was not kidding. You cannot have conflict that betrays the central core tenets of what makes your character special, and Repunzel is the embodiment of the feminine side of sexuation, and that makes her just as much of a badass as the sword-wielding Cassandra, even more so when you take into account that they are friends because of Rapunzel's personality. The TV show structure, the animation, the music, now he has an EGOT, the plot, so many spoilers, but most of all the characterization of Repunzel and why she is my idea of a great badass female character is why Tangled the series, or Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure, is great. Okay, maybe just a few more because there are so many. Pascal and Max are always good for a laugh, but there is a whole episode that hinges on Pascal's backstory. Minor characters and villains are never dull. There are some spectacular bit parts that bring in really well-known voice actors. Clancy Brown is in this, and he always does a great job. I have to talk about the songs one more time. Eugene gets the solo called Everything I Ever Thought I Knew, and it was outstanding. Rapunzel and Cassandra sing this one duet called The View From Up Here, and it's beautiful. But then later on, they sing another song that just might be the most metal Disney song I've ever heard, but it has spoilers in it, so I can't talk about it. But you need to watch this show. Hey, thanks for watching that video. Brush that like button and feel free to share and subscribe if you can. And leave a comment telling me what you thought of the show or other shows that you can't stop watching even if they are for children. You can always catch our podcast every week and new episodes of This Is a Thing right here on Cinemaster's Ultimate Timeline.